Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Ian. I'm one of the members of the Programming Committee at Constellations Chamber Concerts, and I am honored to be joined here today by this panel of five inspiring artists and leaders in our field. Thank you for joining us, George Shirley, Allison Loggins-Hull, Charles Overton, Randall Goosby, and Terri Allen. Thank you all so much for being here today. So each of you represent a very different stage in an artistic career. And I thought to begin our conversation, I would ask each of you about your experiences building and sustaining those careers wherever you happen to be in that continuum. So George, if we could start with you, your career, of course, is marked with so many firsts, not the least of which that you were the first African American tenor to perform a leading role at the Met. I was wondering if you would talk about your experiences as a Black singer growing up and starting your career. What has changed since then? What hasn't changed?
Well, I started singing with my parents in church, as many of us did. I started singing when I was 4 years old. My mother sang, my dad played piano, and we sang in our church in Indianapolis, Indiana, and in churches around the area, around the city. My parents began my musical education formally when I was 5, with piano lessons. And they entered me in my first competition when I was 5. There was a children's program sponsored by Blocks, which was a big department store downtown Indianapolis. And I won second prize, which was a chance to make a recording. So I made my first recording when I was 5. I remember standing in the studio watching the wax peel off of the disc as it was being made. I was fascinated by that. My parents had that recording until a few years ago, 1970, when they moved and they lost it. I sang an old Bing Crosby tune, "There's a Gold Mine in the Sky." So we moved to Detroit when I was 6, joined a large church there, Ebenezer AME, that had a tremendous music program. Senior choir that sang the European oratorio selections, a gospel choir, a young people's choir, 2 organists, one of whom with whom I studied. She taught me art songs and spirituals and what have you. So singing has been a part of my life ever since before I came out of the womb, I believe. And when I graduated from high school, Detroit had a fantastic program of music education, one of the best in the country during those years. So by the time I got to the 6th grade, I could read music. My fellow students could read music if they had any chops at all. High school, tremendous musical experience. My first opportunity to sing tenor solos in Messiah came when I was in the 11th grade. We did Messiah every Christmas with an alumni chorus that came back to join us. This is basically a Black high school, Northern High in Detroit. I sang tenor solos. My first experience singing anything from the Verdi Requiem was in one of our spring concerts, and we sang the Kyrie, and I sang the tenor solos in that, not realizing I was being prepared to sing this literature with Philadelphia Orchestra and Detroit Symphony and other orchestras as a professional. By the time I started college, Wayne University in Detroit, I was focused on becoming a music educator. I wanted to be a music teacher, inspired by the wonderful teaching that I'd experienced, especially in high school. Didn't have an opera program. I wasn't interested in opera. I was into the stereotype. Whenever anyone said opera, then I imagined people standing around on stage with horns on their heads and spears in their hands. Opera was a non-starter for me. My senior year at Wayne, I was approached by the Glee Club director. And he said, "I want to do Stravinsky's Oedipus Rex. Take a look at the role of Oedipus." I thought, "Oh, okay." And we did it. We did 3 performances of it. It was a fabulous experience, but it didn't say to me, "Shirley, this is going to be your professional life." I wasn't interested. I was focused on getting my degree as a choral music teacher. I started teaching actually my last semester at Wayne as an emergency substitute. And I wound up teaching at the other basically black high school, Detroit Miller High, a school that produced Della Reese, Ahmad Jamal, people, Kenny Burrell, people like that, before my time. So I started teaching there, and as it turned out, I had two young women in my girls' voice class that went on to become internationally known singers. One was Kim Weston, jazz singer, and the other was Martha Reeves and the Vandellas. I was very happy doing what I was doing. I finished my first year, and I was getting ready to get married. Got a letter from Uncle Sam saying, "You're going to get married to me in June." I said, "Come on, I mean, this is all my plans down the drain." I didn't want to spend any time in the Army. Korea had ended a year before I graduated from Wayne, but the draft was still very much alive. So I went into the Army as a bandsman. I learned to play a euphonium in a little band that was formed at the church that I attended in Detroit. So I went in as a bandsman, but after 2 weeks of playing the flag up and playing the flag down, and I thought I was going to go out of my mind if I was going to spend 2 years doing that. I had heard about the United States Army Chorus, which was being formed in early 1956, before I was drafted. I didn't go and audition for them, as three of my friends did in Wayne, and they were accepted. So they knew that they were going into the Army to sing in the chorus. And the chorus was recruiting from all the universities across the country. But I didn't go for two reasons. First of all, it was a 3-year deal, and I didn't want to spend 3 years in the Army. I wanted to get back to Detroit and and resume my teaching career and take care of my wife and a little girl who was born later, Walter Reed. And the second reason was that the Army Band, which had been formed in the 1920s, had never had a black member. It's stationed at Fort Myer, Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area, in Virginia. And I thought to myself, man, you'll be out of your mind if you go and spend your money to go and audition for this organization, because there's no way that you can get into the snowball in Hades that you're going to get into this group. So I didn't go and audition, as my three friends, who were all Caucasian, did. And as I said, they were accepted. But after 2 weeks and my second week of training, in this boring existence, I thought, no, I'm going to Washington, D.C. and audition for this chorus. So I, along with two of my colleagues in the band, who were both Caucasian, we took a leave of absence, drove as far as Cincinnati, and one of this fellow's two-door Studebaker, they had about this much room in the back seat. And we thought, no, we're not going to make it to Washington, D.C. We got tickets. We flew to Virginia. My friends auditioned for the band leader, Captain Samuel Laboda, a Russian American, who eventually became the leader of the Army band. And he told my friends, "No, can't use you. Thank you very much for coming." I did my audition, and he said, "Can you wait a few minutes?" I said, "Yes, sir." A few minutes became a half hour, and I thought to myself, yeah, here we go. I knew this was going to happen. Idiot coming here. Anyway, he came out of the command room, and he looked at me and he said, "Well, we've decided we'd like to have you join us if it's what you really want." And I said, "Sir, if it wasn't what I really wanted, I wouldn't have traveled all night to get here." He turned red. He said, "Yeah, you're right." So that opened the doors for me into this organization. I was the only Black member of the chorus. Many of the guys were from the South. Some of them were distant. Some of them were warming and welcoming right off the bat. And I found myself surrounded by some of the best male singers in the country. Guys who went on to have careers on Broadway, in opera. And this was something new for me. But I was determined to do my 2 years. They didn't insist on my signing on the third year. I was going to do the 2 years and get the heck out and get back to Detroit. One of my friends kept urging me to go sing for a private teacher that he was studying with, because most of the guys were studying voice in Washington. And this fellow kept urging me to go and sing for this old guy. And so finally, just to get him off my back, I was about maybe a year from getting out of the Army. I just went over and I said, okay, I'll sing for the old guy, and shut my friend up. And the old guy looked at me and he said, you study with me 1 year, I guarantee you'll have a career. Well, no one had ever said anything like that before to me. I sang solos in college and church, in the Army chorus. I was one of the soloists. And I thought to myself, yeah, I don't want to go back to Detroit and 10 years down the road kick myself for not finding out what this old guy was saying. I mean, he didn't look like he needed my money. He had had a career as an opera singer in Germany and in the States early last century. And he had his own home, and he was very happy teaching. And when he said that, he had to see who he was talking to. He had to see this stuff. And he had to know that there weren't that many black tenors singing operatically in the world at that time. I only knew of one fellow, Bill Dupree, who was in these singing sergeants, the Air Force group. He was getting out to go to New York to sing small roles with the New York City Opera. But that's the only person I ever knew, the other tenor that was singing. So anyway, I thought that I would, okay, give it a shot. I asked my wife what she thought about it, and she made the other mistake she ever made in life. She said, well, whatever you want to do is all right with me. Okay. So I signed up for an extra year to have income and benefits to take care of my wife and little girl. And that was a turning point. About 2 weeks after I signed up, this shows how God works. I got a call from a woman in New York City named Sally Tournow. And she said, I have a small opera company, and we do a summer season in Woodstock, New York. We just lost one of our 2 tenors, small company. She said, and our bass told me to call you. I didn't know Sally Tournow. Oh, bass, what bass? The bass turned out to be a fellow who had just gotten out of the Army chorus 2 months before I was supposed to get out. A fellow named Ara Berberian. He took a degree in law from the University of Michigan, never used it, and wound up singing for about 20 years with the Metropolitan Opera. Ara didn't know that I had signed up for an extra year. So he told her to call me. And I said, gee, I can't do it. I just signed up for an extra year. Please keep me in mind, because I'll be getting out of the Army about this time next year, and I'll be looking for work. She said, well, come up in January and audition, and we'll see where it goes. I put the phone down and I looked up and said, are you trying to tell me something? So I finished studying with Georgie. I went up that January and sang for them. They gave me a contract, my first contract to sing opera. Now with Georgie, I learned maybe 2 operatic arias, and that was it, with the exception of Oedipus Rex. How often does Oedipus Rex get performed by an opera company? So I started off singing 5 roles that summer. Perfect situation. Small theater, seated about 200 people, 2 pianos. We, the soloists, there are only 7 members of the company. We, the soloists, sang the chorus as well. It was a perfect place for me to get my feet wet in this profession I knew nothing about, really. I made my debut as Eisenstein in Die Fledermaus. I sang Rodolfo in La Bohème. I sang Belmonte in the Abduction from Seraglio. I sang Harun in Jamile, and I sang Torquemada in L'Espagnol. All in English, thank God, because the only language I'd ever studied was French. Never spoke that because in junior high school and high school, we just conjugated verbs. So I had a lot of work to do to catch up. And before I got out of the Army, I decided that I would audition, because I wanted to get some feedback. I was going into this profession that I knew nothing about, but that God had given me the ability to do, and I had to discover that along the way. So I entered the Met auditions, and in the Mid-Atlantic region, and I lost. And I went to the reception following it, and I was standing there, and John Gutman, who was one of Rudolph Bing's assistant managers, and Howard Hook, who was the chairman of the auditions, came up to me. And they said, Gutman said, look, we want you to know that we like what we heard you do today, but we don't think that you're ready to go to New York City yet for the semifinals. But keep doing what you're doing. And that's all I needed to hear from people who knew what it was about. So that is how I got into this business that I had no interest in before, until a couple of years before that moment. I believe at this point in my life that the script was written when I was conceived. And I've just done the best I can do with what I was given at conception to play the role that I played. People say, well, yeah, you've done this, you've done that. Well, I didn't plan on doing it. It was already there for me to discover along the way, and to discover that I had been implanted with the talent to do it, and also, more importantly, the ability to do the work, the desire to do the work, because if I'd been given the talent and not the desire to do the work, then the talent would have lain fallow in the field. So I can only be grateful when people congratulate me and say, you've done, no, I'm just thankful that I was given the ability to do what I was born to do.
Thank you, George. Yeah, that's right. I think so. I mean, that was such an inspiring story to hear about all of the different people and tiny little events that had to come together in the exact way they did, and then the opportunity that you took when it was laid in front of you. So thank you so much for taking us through all of that. Maybe let's move to Allison now, if we can. So one thing that I really admire about you is all of the different artistic spaces that you exist in. You're an amazing flute player. You're a composer. You're a producer. You do so many different things across so many different genres. But of course, all of these spaces, or many of these spaces, are mostly populated with white males. That's the world that we live in right now. So, as a Black woman trying to inhabit all these spaces, what are some of the challenges that you face as you're going through all of that?
Wow. Your question immediately makes me think about when I was younger, and when I first started really trying my hand at composing. And it was during a time where I had just recently finished my undergraduate degree in flute performance. I was very much on that track to being a traditional classical flutist. But I always had this great pull to be creative and to kind of make something happen out of nowhere. I've always been like that ever since I was little. And when I started writing music, I didn't really know what I was doing. I guess I should say I first started experimenting with improvisation and then kind of moved on to composition. But I really didn't know what I was doing per se in terms of, I didn't have the formal training in composition. And I don't even think I really considered myself a composer per se until maybe relatively recently, because I didn't necessarily realize this at the time, but I had this idea that a composer was like an old white guy, and that's what that is. And I knew I was making music, but I guess because of the lack of representation, growing up and growing and training in a classical music environment for so long, I hadn't really imagined that someone like me could be described as a composer, and my music is not, yes, it's coming from it's in the canon of classical music, I guess you could say, in terms of how I structure my music and notate and what have you. But my musical influences are extremely varied, and they always have been. I've always grown up in a house that was full of music. My family loves music. And every genre you can possibly think of, I was like extremely exposed to growing up. So it's just in my ear, it's just part of who I am. So so my music itself definitely, can't help but represent all those different influences. So it doesn't necessarily read either as what you would typically expect classical music to sound like. And I found that, that's been kind of like an interesting place to live too, because I think there's this kind of expectation to what classical music should sound like, and it's typically rooted in this like Eurocentric Western civ, kind of place sound, and that's not necessarily my voice entirely. So I battled, I think, myself, kind of trying to figure out, what I wanted to call my music, what I wanted to call myself, until I eventually realized that, it's all music. Yeah, I'm a composer. Why isn't a songwriter a composer? Why isn't this person, this person who's producing this record, making this type of music, considered a composer? It's kind of, ridiculous, actually, that one would think that a composer is this type of person and only does like this type of music. So once I kind of like got over that, and just realized how kind of absurd it is, I became a little bit more like comfortable like referring to myself as a composer. I think in terms of just kind of like navigating in a world that's I get, like you said, like predominantly white male. It's been I think people, well, how can I say this? I have experienced people being surprised, I guess, at what I've presented to them, because there are definitely, biases out there, and there are definitely people who have expectations that, come from those biases. So I have experienced the kind of like surprised look on people's faces, which is, just another kind of microaggression that exists, right? So definitely that's happened a lot, but I, thankfully, as I've gotten older anyway, have just kind of, I don't want to say shrug it off, but I've just insisted on doing the work and just like purging ahead, just sticking at it, like sticking to my guns. I know not everybody's going to love my music. That's fine. I mean, I don't love every music, and I know that in order for me to, again, be happy in my work and true in it, I just have to, stay genuine and keep working at it and just keep going, and kind of just, close my ears to any kind of naysayers or, people criticizing my work, especially when they're criticizing it in a very Western classical lens, because it doesn't always translate, and that's just what it is. So, but I will say, part of the reasons why I am involved in so many different, I guess you could say, areas of music making. So like, yes, I'm very much involved in a part of the new music community, which is wonderful. And besides writing my own music, I play a lot of other people's music too, which is great. But I have a lot of commercial work under my belt too, which is a completely different musical world and environment, and not necessarily always dominated by white men, which is interesting. Dominated by men, But it's a totally different kind of dynamic at times. But I have found that also in doing that work, my colleagues that I'm working with tend to be a little bit more like diverse and bringing a lot of different perspectives to the table, which I love and I find so much joy in. And I think being involved in all these different capacities, just they, doing one thing informs another thing, so if I'm doing a recording session, like I did a movie soundtrack I played for the Lion King movie, which was great. And that with the Reed Collective Orchestra, and that session in particular was really interesting because it was purposefully diversified. So Hans Zimmer had hired us. We're a collective of classically trained Black musicians, and he had seen a video that we did that maybe a year prior that had gone viral, and he purposefully hired us on that job. And this had to be like approved by Disney and Sony and all these guys, because the filmmaking scoring scene in LA is, predominantly white, honestly. So he had to make that effort to have us there. So being in that situation was like incredible, because it was the first time I had really been in a professional environment of like that caliber, where everybody was just killing it. Everybody was so good. Okay, so there's that. But there's something you can feel like in the energy when you have a group of people who are coming from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and you get like, this kind of pool of perspectives and diversity that uplifts the music making. It's tactile. You can like feel the energy, and it's undeniable. And everybody in that session, not just us, but the folks who are normally in those studios in LA doing that work, everybody said, I've never experienced anything like this. This is one of like the most incredible recording sessions that I've experienced. And I mean, it was magical. So I am grateful that I do have the opportunity to be in situations like that. It's not normal, unfortunately. We definitely need a lot more of that, but it takes somebody like a gatekeeper, like a Hans Zimmer, or in our field, like a presenter or an administrator, to make that conscious decision, like, we're out here, we're not like in the shadows. You know what I mean? We do exist. I hear a lot of people are like, well, where are they? I just, they're not coming to our auditions, or it's like, we're here, but it does, you have to have a consciousness to purposefully make those moves to bring in these different people. And it's not just about optics, and it's not just about like, okay, this is what's going on in the moment right now. It actually like elevates the experience. You're actually bringing in something that heightens the music making, because you're bringing in people from different walks of life. And we all, as artists, I think, bring that to the table, So I don't know if I answered your question. But it kind of just went where it went. But yeah, I try to, besides just loving the different types of music that I do, I try to put myself in spaces where there are different types of people. And I have found that making different kinds of music helps, to kind of broaden that reach in that world.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, and I always think about how like this moment we're in, when there are people writing things that are stretching between genres in all kinds of interesting ways. That this is a great moment where all performers should have these types of experiences that you're talking about, playing for a movie soundtrack, like you're saying, trying to compose themselves, and you're naturally going to expose yourself to many different kinds of artists that way, and that's such a necessary thing, that we can't just be in our bubble only playing with the same exact type of people every single day.
It's a disservice really to your own like growth as a musician, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Well, I can't wait to go check out that soundtrack now. That was good to hear about that. So let me move to Charles now, if I can, because you also sort of fly between a bunch of different spaces in the classical world and in the jazz world. And I would love to hear you just talk about maybe the differences you've experienced with those two groups of people. Like, does it feel different being a performer in the classical world, in the jazz world? What can we learn about those two spaces?
Right. 100%. It's they're complete. Well, I mean, I'm hesitant to say that they're completely different because yes, there are things that are very different about them, but I don't want to, in the same breath, be like, oh yeah, if you're into classical music and you're trying to get into jazz, like there's no hope because they're so different. But before I get into that, I just wanted to say how much all of what Allison said just deeply resonates with me and my experience and what I've been going through here, and like especially the bit about, well, I guess the bits about how one, like everything you do is just going to inform the other sides of your musical persona or personality. And it just got me thinking, and maybe this is like too much of a tangent, but just thinking about how the Western classical music canon and like that very Eurocentric view of classical music for such a long time was so focused on these very insular cultural identities, which, can be interesting and exciting. Like, there's the Italian school, the Viennese school, the French, there's all these things. But it's so interesting to me that American music or Black music or popular music that's all birthed out of, the African diaspora is all about the melding of different things coming together to create something new, and not the kind of blind dedication to what has come before in service of upkeeping a tradition. So I just think kind of, I guess, bleeding into this thing of the difference between classical and jazz, that's the thing that I feel most, I guess, differentiates my experiences in those two worlds. Like at Berklee, I was part of this thing called the Global Jazz Institute, which basically had this as their mission of, just bringing so many diverse voices, not just in terms of like race or cultural identity, but like musical voices, just if you use the word diversity to mean like in across spectrums, that's what they were all about. And it was just, I don't know, so exciting for me to finally have the opportunity to not feel so othered in the jazz community. Because in a way, I mean, playing the harp in kind of every musical situation you're in, you're kind of your own thing, you're othered. Like, are you like in classical music, are you a string instrument? Are you percussion? Are you like, what are you? You never know. Rarely do we have stand partners. There's not necessarily that same sense of community of being in a section. Everything we do, there's that element. And then on the jazz side of things, I play the harp, which is, I mean, there's a long legacy of amazing performers in the jazz or Black American music tradition who, are just exceptional, like Alice Coltrane, Dorothy Ashby. These are, to me, two of the giants that, you can't, like, I'm just trying to say harp in jazz isn't anything new, but it's definitely something rare. So it's hard in both communities not to feel a little bit outside, but with this experience that I had at Berklee and their Global Jazz Institute, I really started to, like, kind of like Allison said, just kind of check myself at the door and get over what I think of myself and just do some work, realize it's not, you don't have to fit the mold of what you think you should be or what people expect you to be, and just do you, like, right. Like I had very similar thoughts. I didn't go to NEC, but I did a lot of work in collaboration at New England Conservatory, being in Boston. And I would pass by that Beethoven statue like so frequently. And I'm like, yeah, that's what a composer is, like Beethoven's a composer. I'm not a composer. But slowly, piece by piece, I was just like, you know what, like, why not? I'm hearing things. Like, I think that's our job as musicians and artists, is not to contrive or to try to be deliberately unique or different or like indie, but just, we have something new to say, or we keep the art alive by, we just hear things, like we are, or hopefully we're hearing things that haven't been heard before, whether it's in classical music through interpretation of written music and just hearing something new in a piece that hasn't been brought to life before, or if it's in jazz or pop or, you know, fields that have more of a focus on writing and composition, where it's literally bringing different textures, sounds, harmonies, melodies together in a way that hasn't been done before. And I don't know, yeah, that's kind of a long tangent, but all that to say, just my experiences kind of being the other in all of these spaces for such a long time really taught me to kind of just like, you know, check that at the door and just, like Allison said, you know, focus on doing the work and being me and just getting what I have to say out there. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Randall, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the work that you've done and the support that you've received from the Sphinx organization. I know that you won their concerto competition when you were 13, I believe, maybe the youngest winner ever, which is really an amazing thing. And they, I mean, I've been following what they've been doing for years. They've been such a leader in the space of supporting artists of color for more than 20 years now. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about what the support that they offered you meant to you and what an organization like that means to this world.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me on, and it's just such an honor and a pleasure to be in all of your company. Sphinx has been integral, I guess, to say the least. You know, before I entered the competition in 2010 when I was 13, and found out that as a application requirement, you know, for the audition videos, they have one piece or two pieces every year that they choose by a Black or Latinx composer. And before that, I didn't know, like Allison and Charles were saying, composer meant white guy to me. You know, I had no idea. And it was just an incredible experience. You know, that was my first, I guess, major competition. And my perception of competitions before that point was an atmosphere of great competitiveness, not necessarily the friendliest, most welcoming environment. And Sphinx is the exact opposite of everything that I had thought. You know, I immediately felt welcomed. You know, all of the participants and contestants were, you know, mingling and engaging with each other before we even found out, you know, where our practice rooms were. You know, we weren't worried about going into our own space as soon as we possibly could. So that was a really eye-opening experience for me, not only because of, you know, learning about Black composers, but honestly learning that there are other Black classical musicians. Before that point, I had never met one. I had never seen one. I was always the only one. It's actually interesting. I started violin when I was 6 in Jacksonville, Florida, where I was one of two Black kids in my school. But I never really felt like the other, because funny enough, when I started, all of my white friends were like, "Oh, that's cool. Why don't I want to start violin?" You know, and all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, we're all in the classroom together having group lessons. After living in Jacksonville for 5 years, I moved to Memphis, Tennessee, where, you know, I went from being one of two to one of like 40% in my school, which again was, you know, I was like, wow, I didn't know there were this many people that looked like me. You know, I was still a kid, but at the same time, now that I'm a part of this larger community of color, I was really the only one who was playing violin, let alone classical music. So in a way, I felt, you know, a part of a greater community, but I also started to feel a little bit more like an outsider in that way. But, you know, back to Sphinx, after I was so fortunate to have won the Junior Division prize in 2010, every single performance that was included as a prize for Sphinx included some sort of community engagement work and, you know, school outreach and going and performing in schools, which made me really nervous because I was 13. I've always looked really, really young for my age. When I was 13, my cheeks were still falling off my face. You know, they were kind of resting on my violin. And I was like, okay, I'm 13. Why am I going into middle schools and high schools where kids have mustaches and beards? Like, what can I possibly offer to them? You know, what could they possibly want to hear from me about my life, let alone classical music? And very, very quickly, I realized that in a lot of these schools, you know, comprised mostly of students of minority backgrounds. Many of these students had never had the chance to experience classical music live. So, you know, even though they were 4 or 5 years older than me, I had these kids coming up to me afterwards being like, "Oh man, that was so cool." You know, just looking out and as I'm speaking and as I'm playing, seeing their jaws drop, being like, "Wow, I've never seen this before." I had a very drastic shift of sort of purpose. And I wanted to continue doing work like that. And I still do my best to continue engaging in work like that, because as more and more people are coming to discover, unfortunately, and to put it quite bluntly, classical music is not a field that was necessarily designed to be pursued by people of color, at least the way I see it. So I want to change that. That's the main thing I think that I've been able to take away and use and grow from, courtesy of Sphinx. So they've played a huge role in not only my artistic development, but also my aspirations towards, you know, a bigger picture, realizing that it's something bigger than myself. It's something even bigger than music, right? It's about bringing people together and opening the eyes of those, you know, who weren't meant to see what I've been so fortunate to see. So I guess that's sort of sums up my experience with Sphinx. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to have been and to continue to be a part of that community.
Thank you. No, that's amazing to hear. Well, it's amazing to hear what you took away from that experience, and how specifically you know what your calling is, what it is that you're working towards right now at such a young age. So that's really an inspiring thing to hear. Terri, okay, we're finally at you. So I would love it if you would. Well, could you just introduce yourself and the group that you work for and the work that you guys do, supporting artists of color and also promoting the classical world to Black audiences?
Certainly. Well, thank you very much for having me as a representative of CAAPA, the Coalition for African Americans in the Performing Arts. We support Black classical musicians, opera singers, and youth, senior citizens, and others in the performing arts by bringing color to the classics. And this is one thing that we do. We have a 5-point program. It's called our CAAPA Cause. And if you think of our acronym CAAPA, what we do is community outreach, arts education, audience development, performance opportunities, and arts partnerships. We've been doing that for about maybe 15, 16 years now. We became 501c3 5 years ago. And we're very thankful to have Professor Maestro Dr. George Shirley on our board of directors. He has been doing a wonderful job with serving our community. He brought to the table one of our premier programs, which is a master class program. We partner with all of the historically Black colleges and universities throughout the nation. And we go in and do complimentary free master classes for students in those HBCUs. Dr. Shirley has also served as our host on the first ever Blacks in Classical Music cruise, where we cruise through the Bahamas. And it's called Arias at Sea, and he was just a wonderful host. He rendered selections from Porgy and Bess and other tunes, and it was just a wonderful cruise that he hosted. And I want to thank all of the young people, Randall and Allison and Charles, for their work. Now, let me just put a disclaimer out there. I am not a trained musician. However, I have music in my heart and in my spirit and my soul. I love it, and have since become an arts advocate as a result of my 2 children, Victor Simonson, who is a composer and pianist, and Pamela Simonson, who is an opera singer, who just loved classical music and wanted to simply give back to the community. And they started CAAPA many years ago to be able to do that, because they themselves were recipients of different scholarships and different programs that our Greek organizations and our social organizations gave them as encouragement to study classical music. Because, to echo the three artists in classical music, it wasn't thought of as young African American, young Black people playing the violin or singing an aria or playing a major piano piece. But they were encouraged, and they wanted to simply give back to youth. Since then, we have a scholarship program that we give out monies to graduating high school seniors. We have a Sing for Seniors outreach program where we go into all of the different nursing homes in this particular area in the DMV. We have, as I mentioned, the Master Class Series. One of our important outreach efforts is our Performance Series, which is where we offer opportunities to performers, students, aspiring, emerging, and professional musicians. We've showcased our performances and our productions all over the area, including many at the Kennedy Center. And of course, this season we had to, of course, had to postpone a lot of them. One was going to be a major event called Divas and Devos, a tribute to Black opera singers, which was a special tribute to Jesse Norman. We were doing that on behalf of the Kennedy Center. And that was one of our major projects that we were very excited about, bringing in individuals to be able to pay tribute to Jesse Norman. But the organization itself, as I mentioned, began in order to be able to give back to the community. And we are here to bring color to the classics in a way where if we're able to help and inspire and to help others reach their goals in classical music among peoples of color, then we do that. We partner with a variety of different arts organizations around the world, with the Korean American Cultural Arts Foundation and others, to be able to kind of diversify the stage, but still with a focus and an overall theme of highlighting the Black classical musician and the Black opera singer. That's where our focus is. And while we embrace all of the other genre of music, the jazz and the classic, the hip hop and the gospel and Negro spirituals and all of the other genre, we still want to make sure that people realize that they're Black opera singers, they're Black violinists, and that these individuals are talented, they're passionate, and they're committed to the craft. So if CAAPA can be in any way, shape, or form do that, that's what we're doing. We've been able to, thankfully, transition some of our programs from a live performance platform to virtual platform. And we've done that in every week for the past 2 months now. We've been featuring Versitals, which is a combination, it's virtual recitals, and they premiere on Saturdays at 4 o'clock. We've just recently launched Candid Cadenzas, where seasoned professional musicians are giving advice to young people through letters and videos. And that just began on Monday. One of our other programs was Operations, which is a virtual program that was made available to educators. They were able to take those programs and apply them into their classrooms. And then, of course, we had our scholarship, our virtual scholarship. We did it locally, but next year, because of the virtual opportunities, there's a bittersweet situation that's going on with regard to being able to apply these virtual communities to our different programs and our activities. But we are going to be able to hopefully take that nationwide as well. So there are a lot of things that CAAPA has been doing and continues to do, and without our supporters and partners. And I do want to say one thing, and this is a very sore subject for many people. Traditionally, there are Caucasian and arts organizations that are very, very heavily funded. We've done some research and we found out that statistics have shown that organizations of color are traditionally underrepresented in terms of philanthropy, in terms of funding, and in terms of financial contributions. And I just want to thank your organization for helping to bring color to the classics. But also, if there are any other arts organizations out there, please be sensitive and basically share the wealth. You know, there is enough to go around for everyone. There are programs that are out there. But if there is an opportunity that you see that would allow a Black organization such as CAAPA or other arts organizations to be able to benefit from some of the resources that traditionally have been just siloed to specific organizations, we would really appreciate that. So I thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you for that. And yes, for all of our audience out there that's watching, we're absolutely going to link to CAAPA so that you can learn more about the amazing work that they're doing in the DC area and all over the country. And please support them if you're able to in this moment. So I've kept you all for a long time. I don't want to abuse your time, but I was wondering if just really quickly I could go around the room and have each of the artists that submitted such amazing works to us to hear today, just to talk a little bit about the selection that they chose. Maybe Allison, I'll start with you since I know your piece really well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we'll be doing and by we, I mean myself and Sandbox Percussion, which is Ian's awesome percussion quartet. We're doing a piece I wrote called Hammers, and for flute and percussion. And Hammers, I actually wrote this piece a while ago, like early on in my compositional career. I think maybe like 2011 or 12. I'm not really sure. And it's inspired by just cacophonous street noise, really. You know, I was living in Brooklyn, New York, where I lived for several years, and there was just a period where like there was so much like racket outside of my apartment, and I was just like, oh, but when I was getting really frustrated because it was, you know, increasingly hard to do other things at home. But I was like, you know, maybe I can channel my frustration and use it as a means to write something. And I hadn't written anything for percussion prior to that, but I always loved playing with percussionists. When I was an undergrad, I spent like half my time hanging out in the percussion suite, just like, you know, wanting to be around these like rhythmic giants. So I was always thrilled about percussion. And yeah, I was like, well, you know, it's very percussive what's happening right now. And, you know, maybe I can use that to inform this piece. So, and when I started to write it, you know, I was thinking about that, but also just thinking about kind of like this idea of like organized chaos, I guess you could say. You know, something that sounds really like busy and hectic, but is trying to get a job done in an efficient way at the same time. And it's kind of resonating with me now. I've actually never performed the piece myself. Other people have played it, but I've never actually had the opportunity to perform it, which is just ironic. But yeah, it's resonating with me now because it's reminding me of a lot of the noise that's kind of going on right now. Some of it is good noise, some of it is not. You know, but there's a lot of activity going on around us right now, and some of the qualities of the piece remind me of like marching. You know, I use the snare drum in a way that kind of really triggers this idea of like marching to me. So I felt like I wanted to kind of like revisit this piece in this moment, to see how what I'm feeling and what I'm observing and experiencing can translate now into a performance of this piece. And I was also really excited about the opportunity to play with Ian and his group because they're so great. So, you know, that's always fun as a composer to have awesome musicians play your music. So we'll be doing Hammers following this talk.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we've played Hammers once before, but like you mentioned, not with you, with another flute player. So I'm glad that we got at least the virtual chance to play it with you here.
Me too. Yeah.
Charles, what are we going to hear from you today?
Sure. So today I'll be presenting a ballad called Two Different Worlds, originally written by Al Frisch with lyrics by Sid Wayne. But I came to know this tune through a legend, well, maybe not legendary, which is sad, but jazz pianist named Jackie Byard. He was a Boston-based guy, super influential in, you know, this hometown community. He actually started the jazz program at New England Conservatory, which originally was called the Afro-American Music Studies program. But yeah, so I just when it came time to think of something that was near to my heart, I've always just had a soft spot in my heart for playing ballads. But I actually came to know this piece a little bit more in preparation for this. I never knew that it wasn't written by Jackie Byard. That's just how I knew it, and I assumed that he wrote it. But in doing a little bit of research, I actually found out that this song has lyrics. Whoa. But the lyrics are actually, I think really appropriate for the time that we're going through right now. The last stanza says, "Two different worlds. We live in two different worlds, but we will show them as we walk together in the sun that our two different worlds are one." I just think that's, you know, a powerful thing to be thinking of right now. It's just how, you know, we can come together in different communities and trying to, you know, like we're doing in this conversation, to try to promote change and just, you know, leave the world a better place than we left it. So yeah, this is Two Different Worlds by Al Frisch, but came to know to me by Jackie Byard.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Randall, what are we going to hear from you today?
So I am going to be playing a favorite sort of short piece of mine by Fritz Kreisler, called Liebesleid, which translates, I believe, to Love's Sorrow. Allison and Charles both had such profound stories and meanings behind their selections. But this is really just some beautiful music and some of my favorite music to play. And just the title, Love Sorrow, is quite reflective of how I'm feeling right now. Love is something that I try to put into everything that I do. And it's a time where it's not quite as easy to do that as it's been in the past. The piece is a sort of Viennese waltz style, lighthearted in nature, but I think the character of it is one of sort of inner conflict and struggle in a way, which is what I've been feeling. You know, I've been, as we all have, tirelessly working to, you know, try and inspire and create some meaningful change. Yet at the same time, I'm not quite ready to say I'm hopeful yet, honestly, because, you know, the events of the past weeks and months have happened countless times before, and they have raised awareness and attention countless times before, and yet they, you know, after a few weeks of trending on social media, they sort of fall off the wayside. So, you know, trying to remain hopeful, but at the same time, you know, having to keep a grip on reality a little bit. But I hope that Liebesleid offers a little bit of solace to whoever's listening. It's one of my favorite pieces to play, and I hope everyone enjoys it.
That's a perfect segue for a question that I wanted to pose to George actually before we close today, which I do want to hear you talk a little bit about the song that you chose to sing here, but also you know, you're the elder statesman of this group here that's gathered, and would you talk about, do you think that this moment is any different than other moments that you've lived through? Are you hopeful about something? What are you hopeful for, if anything?
Unmute. What I'm hopeful for, and this ties under what Randall just said, what I'm hopeful for is that the results, the positive results that come from the present situation will have a longer shelf life than similar incidences of hope have ever had throughout human history in the past. There is a fatal flaw, I think, in mortals that creates a situation that whenever there is forward movement, there's also the opposite. When I was in college and pursuing joining Alpha Phi Alpha, all of the pledgees had during Hell Week to walk 2 steps forward in a line and 1 back. 2 forward, 1 back. Perfect metaphor for life, if you will, sadly saying. And in humanity, if you look at history, you'll find that what we're going through right now is nothing new. That whenever we seem to make progress, there is something that pulls us back, or there's something that happens that almost nullifies eventually the progress we have attempted to make. We are human animals, and I look out my window and see the squirrels battling over nuts and the birds fighting for access to the seeds and the feeder. And that's the way we are. That, I think, will never change. I remember looking at one of the photos from the marches recently, and there was a young woman who had something that said on her shirt, and I can't quote it directly, "This is the last time you will do this to us." Basically, that was a message. And I hope for that, but I know, in looking at human history, that it won't be the last time. I'm just hoping that the positive things that I see coming out of this will last for a longer period of time than they lasted after the Civil War, after that they lasted after the signing of the civil rights documents. It's always 2 steps forward and at least 1 back, because there is that negative influence that happens. I mean, the atomic bomb should have said to the world that playing these war games is over, folks. We have a weapon now that can destroy the planet. How many conflicts have there happened since 1945? And there's one happening right now between China and India. Both countries that have atomic weapons. So here in America today, I just trust that the move to make change happen will not be one that will peter out at some point before my great-grandchildren, of whom I have 4, will enjoy adulthood, hopefully an adulthood that they will be able to enjoy without this happening. But knowing human nature, I have grave doubts. So coming to what I chose, which may seem to negate what I've just said, I've stayed with the lyric stage, but I've gone to Broadway, to Carousel. When you walk through a storm, Hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. You'll never walk alone. Yes, in spite of the fact that I, at this point in my life, don't hold out much hope for a longer shelf life, I know that I have got to move and to work for as much change to happen for as long a period as possible, and not become so depressed as I've been over the past few days and weeks that I refuse to kick against the pricks. That's from the Bible. Jesus says to Saul, it's difficult for you to kick against the pricks. Well, human life has always been about kicking against the pricks, no matter where human beings have lived, whether it was in Africa, whether it was in Europe, whether it's in the United States. That is a part of life that I fear will never disappear. So kicking against the pricks, hopefully this time will provide a longer shelf life than we've ever seen before. So you'll never walk alone is my prayer, is my hope, is my greatest desire.
Thank you. I just want to thank all five of you so much for spending the time that you did with us today, giving myself, the other folks at Constellations, and all of our audience the opportunity to learn from your experiences and from the words that you said. I'm really looking forward to hearing you play as well. So thank you again so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
And thanks for bringing us together. This was great.